Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our program this afternoon. I'm Rita Van Dynen, Branch Manager of Chatham Community Library, and welcome to the third in a series of virtual programs we are doing on Women of Chatham. Today's Women of Chatham feature an esteemed group of panelists in public safety, law enforcement, and in the judicial system. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Perry to begin.
Thank you so much, Rita. I've been looking forward to today, and although I've been saying good morning to everybody as they came on, we are in the afternoon now and looking forward to this program, as Rita said, the third in the series, motivated by the Women's History Month celebration yesterday, today, and tomorrow. A women's perspective of Chatham County. So let me introduce you to who we have on our panel today. And first, Tracy Kelly. Good afternoon, Tracy, again. Tracy is a dedicated public servant with nearly 30 years in law enforcement. Her decisiveness and compassionate leadership were keys to her being the first female to achieve the rank of Chief Deputy with the Chatham County Sheriff's Department. Tracy holds a master's degree in criminal justice administration, as well as bachelor and associate's degree in criminal justice. She earned her advanced law enforcement certificates from from both the Criminal Justice and Sheriff's Education and Standards Commission for her combination of skills, education, and service. Tracy is passionate about teaching and developing future leaders and regularly instructs basic law enforcement training as a specialized driving instructor. She enjoys an active life outdoors and is a candid supporter of health and wellness practices, promoting exercise training programs and mental health services to keep others safe inside and out. Wonderful, Tracy. Thank you for participating. Our next panelist is Tammy Kirkman. Good afternoon, Tammy. Tammy has a new title. She has just been recently made a major with the Chatham County Sheriff's Office. She is the first female major in the department, and she has 26 years of experience in law enforcement, including 7 years as a dispatcher in the 911 center. Golston is Tammy's home, where her family has owned the famous Rufus's restaurant for 45 years. And undoubtedly, we'd have to say that the best burgers and hot dogs and barbecue in Golston are there. She has served as a volunteer firefighter with the Golston Fire Department for 30 years and has been assistant chief for the last 2. Also, she is a general instructor with the Basic Law Enforcement and Detention Centers classes for the last 8 years. She's married to Wade Kirkman, and they have 1 son. Her personal mission statement is to be kind and helpful to others, create the best vision for her staff to follow, and inspire others to be successful through teaching. I thought this was particularly interesting. She says she likes to lead from behind as a mentor so she can see her team achieve, and she always strives to do her best. Thank you so much, Tammy. Our third panelist is Sherri Murrell. Sherri graduated from UNC in 1988 with a bachelor's degree in philosophy and entered law school at Chapel Hill in 1991, graduating in 93. She was admitted to the North Carolina Bar in August of 93 and has practiced in areas of family law, estate planning and administration, real estate, but has worked primarily in the judicial system as an assistant public defender. In 2016, Sherri was elected district court judge for District Court District 15B, which covers Orange and Chatham counties. She was reelected in 2020 and continues to serve the people in Orange and Chatham in that district court judgeship. Between college and law school, Sherri worked in numerous jobs, everything from a waitress, a house sitter, a legal assistant, and the night manager of the homeless shelter in Chapel Hill. So thank you, Sherri, for joining us. Kaylee Tabor, good afternoon. Kaylee has been a criminal justice advocate and innovator for over 25 years. Protecting the vulnerable is the keystone of her service to the community. And as a prosecutor, she focused working on the most difficult and challenging criminal cases and has made our community safer by targeting child predators and recidivist sex offenders with groundbreaking appellate court approved criminal prosecutions. She's also helped write and pass laws that strengthened protections for victims of crime. She is a North Carolina board certified expert in criminal law and a trainer for law enforcement, medical providers, sexual assault nurse examiners, and attorneys. Kaylee graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with a degree in political science, and then married her college sweetheart, Jeff, in her junior year, the same year that he was commissioned as an officer with the United States Marine Corps. During her time in service and as a military spouse, she worked as a substance abuse counselor and emergency services worker for the Red Cross. She received her law degree in 1996, graduating with honors, and she was a key community partner in establishing the Mental Health Diversion Court, which is known as the Community Resource Court for Orange and Chatham counties, which provides solutions for the mentally ill persons in the criminal justice system. That court was the first of its kind in the state of North Carolina and continues to provide critical services 20 years later. Kaylee resides in Pittsboro with her husband, Jeff, who's now a retired captain from the Raleigh Police Department, 3 German Shepherds, 2 cats, and a rotating cast of foster dogs, which are sponsored through CARE. And so welcome so much, Kaylee, where several of us have dogs in the background or that we're hoping will not interrupt the program. And finally, Renita Foxx. Good afternoon, Renita. Renita Foxx is married with 2 children. She graduated from UNC Chapel Hill in 2002 with an undergraduate degree in sociology, and then obtained her Master's of Science in Agency Counseling from NC-A&T State University in 2009. She began working in Chatham County in 2007 as a substance abuse counselor. She's both fully licensed as a mental health and substance abuse counselor. And in 2012, she was named Chatham County Employee of the Year. In 2017, she was promoted to Court Programs Director, where she currently works providing an array of services for justice-involved individuals. Renita enjoys working in the community, providing resources, ensuring individuals and their families are aware of the opportunities they can use to move forward and advance their futures. So thank you to all of you. And so let us get started and talk about some issues about public safety and women in the community. I have a series of questions. If you would like to answer, why don't you raise your hand, and then everybody does not need to answer all the questions, but you have been provided with those ahead of time, so maybe you have your favorites. And so let's start out by asking what barriers you feel that you have faced in your career, and what is one thing that has helped you overcome those barriers?
I have to say, I think that's, when I think about that question, it's difficult to answer because I haven't, I don't feel like I've had a lot of barriers. I think I've had a lot of support and a lot of good fortune. but not a lot of typical or not a lot of extraordinary barriers. I would say, and it's hard to know, I think about this as a woman, what barriers are there for women? And there certainly are barriers, but when you're a woman and you've been living with those barriers your entire life, it's sometimes you just accommodate to them and you get used to them. I do think back though on ways that I was talked to by well-meaning men in the profession that would not have happened had I not been a woman. I remember it's probably my first or second day on my first job as a lawyer in another county as a public defender. And my boss was, showing me through the courthouse and introducing me to the local lawyers. And one of the local lawyers just was very polite and enthusiastic in greeting me, but said to my male boss, "Well, I'm glad to see you're hiring some good looking ones now."
Oh,
Yeah. So, things that stick with you, but, and I realized it at the time as like completely inappropriate, but it wasn't, he would not have understood that. Right. I mean, I guess if I'd said, "Wow, that is completely inappropriate," he probably would have stopped and thought about it. But I don't know, about 26, and I wasn't about to say that. So I think that there are things as women that we live with all the time, and we sort of become used to them, or we just let them roll off. I feel like as I've gotten older and I have daughters who are pretty astute about this stuff, I'm paying more attention to it and less willing to just let it roll off. But I think, I don't feel like when I went to law school, there were a lot of women in the law school, so I had support that way. When I entered the profession, there were a lot of women in my office and women with a great deal of experience who were very helpful and very supportive. I did not feel like the men that I worked with were undermining in any way, like in my office, but there are just certain, I think there's certain things that happen sometimes that you just, what do you do with that? And you do realize that in kind of accommodating it, it eventually takes its toll. It's hard for me to completely describe it, but I think that it does take its toll.
So I have a story about moving to Chatham County. I attempted to work in law enforcement at the Chatham County Sheriff's Office. I came in with experience and education and wanted to speak with the sheriff about joining his agency, and was told pretty much, "Little lady, we don't need you here." Needless to say, that did not go over very well with me. I went on, joined another law enforcement agency, got even more experience. And because of men who didn't see being a female as a bad thing with an open mind, brought me into the Chatham County Sheriff's Office as a staff sergeant. And I have worked my way up the past 20 years that I've been there for a lot of firsts. First chief deputy, first female major. But it was one of those smacks in the faces that in the early 90s, I had never experienced as a young law enforcement officer, to be called, one, little lady, and two, to say that they didn't need me when they had absolutely no idea about me at all.
thank you, Tracy. And thank you, Sherri. Is there anyone else that would like to share on this?
I would say that I've had experiences that are similar to Tracy's and Sherri's. in that when I first became a lawyer in the prosecution, because I started out as a prosecutor early on, you're working in courtroom, and back then it was mostly men. Most of the lawyers were men, the prosecutors were men, the judges were all men. So it was kind of a unique experience, and I had to sort of put my foot down because of the way some of the attorneys would talk to me. I mean, I'm a young woman, and some of the language that they would use would be completely inappropriate. And that was in the 90s. And so I went to my boss and I said, boss, and I said, I'm not going to put up with that. So you're going to have a conversation with your fellow male members of the bar, because I'm just not going to put up with it. And to his credit, he did that. And so they basically just took it underground. They were not as overt about the misogyny at that point. It was, they kept it on the down low. But that gave me time to work and to grow in an environment and learn how to deal with those kinds of situations in a way that was positive and moved forward. But I will tell you, as recently as last year, a gentleman in the bar who is roughly, I don't know, 5 or 6 years older than me, said, "Hey, honey, how you doing?" In the Superior Courtroom while I was working on a case with him. And I was like, no. After 25 years, I've earned the right for you to call me by my name. And he went, okay, and looked a little bit taken aback, but he's still in training. I'm still working on him. But it goes to show you, it's not something we put completely in the past, for sure.
Being female, but also being a female of color, things have always been very hard because majority of the fields that I encounter are majority white. So I would say the one thing, there's so many different challenges in working in this field, but I would say the one thing that I have learned is that therapy is important, and that taking your own mental health seriously is extremely important, because you can't pour from an empty cup. So throughout the years, I have had to step back and invest in myself, because if you can't invest in yourself, then you're going to constantly be on the edge, and you're going to constantly feel like you're inadequate, or constantly feel like you have something to prove because of you being a female and also being a woman of color. So I have learned, or I am in the process of learning through therapy, that taking care of myself is extremely important, especially as we are often looked to working in public safety to care for the community. And I can't care for the community appropriately if I don't take care of myself.
Very nicely put. Thank you, Renita. I think we all need to remind ourselves of that. You know, lately there has come a new expression, at least it's new to me, that, you know, your work-life balance is out of joint or unbalanced. And I think that's so interesting, because I expect that all of us here, panelists and audience alike, have experienced the requirement of being a woman with a profession and with responsibilities in the home and in the community. And I'm not sure anybody ever worried about our work-life balance. And so I admire the candidness of your thoughts there, Renita, as we all struggle trying to decide, as Sherri said, do you not say anything and perpetuate that kind of sexism, or do you say something and then end up alienating someone? There's a fine balance in there, Kaylee, I think you spoke to your calling, and so that's fascinating. Tammy, did you want to contribute, or shall we just pass to the next question?
Just a similar story. I had a supervisor to tell me that that I would never make a career in the detention facility, and then I thought, I hope one day I will be your captain, and I was. But we are very good friends now, and I tell that story a lot. She gets mad at me, and then I had a supervisor to tell me that the way I talked and the way I looked, that I would never further in my career, because I was overweight, and I felt down on myself, and listening to them, make fun of me and stuff, put a fire under me. And so I showed them.
Good for you, Tammy. All right.
I have one more thing to add. When the fire lights in you, that's, finding that balance, because sometimes we work so hard to prove that we belong. And when you're working so hard to prove that we belong, that's when, sometimes we do become exhausted, and then we start taking everything to offense, because we're so used to being either the only woman or the only minority in the room. So we're always kind of looking or trying to be on defense. And, sometimes, I guess in today's culture, letting my guard down has been hard. But that's a part of mental health, and, and being in therapy.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. All right. What strengths do you bring to your job in public safety, in your public safety career, that are highly valued and unique?
I was going to say that one of the strengths that I bring, I guess, to my field is sometimes, lived experience is very valuable when you're working with mental health and substance abuse or addiction. So having that lived experience with a family member who has struggled with mental health or addiction helps you to be a little bit more supportive to those in need.
Thank you, Renita.
I would say absolutely, Renita. And one of the attributes that has helped me in my career as a prosecutor, you're working to seek justice for a victim and your community, but you have a duty to protect the rights of others as well. So you have to have a very balanced outlook. And part of having lived experience, like Renita's talking about, which is 25 years of working with people that don't necessarily didn't grow up like I did, or don't look like I look, or didn't have the same advantages of a secure family that I had. But also, my life experience, having family members with severe and persistent mental illness, that helps me have some understanding of what families are going through when their friends or family members are coming through the criminal justice system. So I absolutely, that lived experience, having lived overseas, and, when my dad was in the Army, my husband was in the Marine Corps, really gives you a unique perspective that, yes, we're all special, but we're no more special than anybody else, right? And I think that is an attitude that helps when you're in the criminal justice system, because you see everybody as somebody who is worthy of your assistance and your care, no matter what their life situation is at that moment. So that's something kind of unique to law enforcement and public safety, I think.
Thank you, Kaylee.
Just to piggyback on what Renita started, I mean, I think having people in positions in law enforcement and prosecutors on the bench in positions like Renita's, coordinating court programs. You know, there was a time when it was mostly men and mostly white men that held those roles. And I will sort of get out there and say, and probably men who, if they had spouses, did not come home and cook dinner or do laundry or pack lunches or all of those things. And I think that when we bring typically not all the same perspective, all of our lived experience is different, but I would say that there are probably some common denominators in our lived experiences, definitely different than the folks that traditionally held all of these jobs. So when lawyers come in the courtroom and see a woman prosecutor, women in law enforcement, a woman judge, and when litigants come in the courtroom and see those people, they see someone who they can at least maybe hope share some of their experience. And, you know, we're going to hear what they have to say in a way that brings a different perspective than the folks who traditionally held those jobs. Now, I will say, having said that, until recently, most of our district court judges were men. And I was always felt fortunate in our district that they happened to be men who took a pretty active role in caring for and raising their children. So if I was in a position where I had to say, I have a sick child at home as a lawyer and I'm going to need to split this day, I never really got hassled about it. And I don't think that other women did either, but I'm not sure that that was the case in a lot of jurisdictions where, you know, male judges and male prosecutors who were controlling the criminal court calendar might not have played that role in their family and been much less flexible about dealing with people who did have roles in their families as primary caregivers, or at least co-equal caregivers. So I think it has impacts in a lot of ways, just to have the different perspective of women, the different perspective of people of color, different perspectives with people of different ages, different ethnic backgrounds or social backgrounds. And I think that the more that the more diversity we have, in some ways, the stronger we are. Well, certainly the stronger we are and the better able we are to sort of deal with the folks who rely on us to do our jobs well.
Thank you, Sherri. Here's a fun one. What advice would you give yourself when you just started your career, pretending as though you have just started your career? What do you know now that you wished you'd known when you first started?
Cindy, I have a lot of interns that come through my office. So that is often a question that they ask me. It's like, what would you have done differently, Renita, when you started over? And I guess the most important thing that I tell them is, especially when you're young, is to be limitless. If you have a passion, follow your passion. And to always be flexible. Life's going to always throw curveballs. It's always going to try to kind of knock you off your feet. But the more flexible you are and the more you're able to kind of pivot, the better chance you have to survive. So I often tell most of the students that come in my office is to always be flexible and to invest in themselves. But more importantly, to, be limitless. Like, if you have this burning passion to make jewelry, make your jewelry on the side. You can still have your main career and you can still fuel your passion. So I always try to tell them not to give up on what they, wanted to be when they were younger.
Certainly, that's another helpful mental health item as well, Renita. That's a good reminder that your career doesn't need to completely occupy you. It's an important aspect of our lives, but we have other joyful things that we can do, including being with our children. Tammy, did you have some thoughts?
Yes, I always tell my newly hires that come in, and I usually sit down and talk with them to follow your dreams, and don't let anyone tell you that you can't do anything. As a domestic violence survivor, I usually tell my story on how I was always told that I would never amount to anything, and how people didn't want to follow my advice. So I always tell that story, and I always tell them that my door is always open, that I want to see them succeed and go for the stars.
Wonderful reminder. Thank you very much.
I would say don't let the fear of making mistakes stand in your way of doing your job boldly. And also to not be afraid to stand up for yourself.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
So I
Tracy?
would say to stay determined, which I have always been and will always be. And that just because the plans that you made don't always go in the direction that you wanted it to, doesn't mean that what's going to happen is a bad thing or that you failed, because change is not always failure. Positive things can come out of things that you didn't plan for. So stay determined and keep on going. So I would say to stay determined, which I have always been and will always be. And that just because the plans that you made don't always go in the direction that you wanted it to, doesn't mean that what's going to happen is a bad thing or that you failed, because change is not always failure. Positive things can come out of things that you didn't plan for. So stay determined and keep on going.
I like that very much. I spent almost 20 years being a legal secretary and thinking that I couldn't be a lawyer. Although I worked for people who were very encouraging to me, and eventually they encouraged me, to go to law school and supported me in many wonderful ways while I went back to school. And but it's an amazing thing that sometimes it takes a while, as you said, to fulfill something, a dream or an ambition. But the fact is that maybe in a way you needed a greater sense of commitment or time, or there's something that makes us older students. And I was almost 40 years old when I went to law school. We take things more seriously, and I think we all have that kind of inherent knowledge that maybe I was meant to do this at this time instead of that time. So it's a good thought that regardless of where we are, maybe we really were meant to be there at that time. What are What are skills that might be important to you to you and your job that might surprise us? Is there something about your position that that makes that the general public just doesn't know?
I'm gonna say this because I think that lawyers know it, but we forget that there's something about the process of going through law school and being a lawyer and then being around a bunch of lawyers that makes you forget that things that you take for granted about like how the court systems work are not necessarily things that just folks out there in the world know. And one of the big ones that I have encountered is people who email me or want to talk to me about an ongoing case, and they seem surprised when I'm like, I can't talk to you about that, or I respond to an email and say, when I realized this email was about a case, I stopped reading it, and I can't, it's not appropriate for me to talk to you about this out of court. People assume, I think, well, they think, and I get this part of it, that the judge needs to have more information, and I have some information to give, which I get. But they don't often understand is that there is a time and place to give it. And like emailing me or calling me or stopping me in the grocery store to tell me something about an ongoing case is not something I can hear. And if they think about it, then they do get it, but that it would be unfair if I'm taking in information from people in that way and not in a courtroom by the, legal rules and the rules of evidence that we have set out. So I've found that to be something that I've had to try to make sure that people think that understand that I'm not being rude, but that there are rules that we have to live by in the legal system, and getting information in the grocery store or by an email, even if it's well-meaning, is not the way I can get information.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Sherri. That's also part of being a small community, isn't it? running into someone in the grocery store. My children always used to wonder why it took me so long to do my grocery shopping. And it was oftentimes because I was running into folks that either had a political concern or a legal concern or something like that. So it does make for a challenge. Anybody else about skills that are important to your job that might surprise the general public?
Well, this is sort of piggybacking on what Sherri was saying, but one of the interesting things about being a prosecutor is I work, with people who are victims of crime, and they come in and they meet with me, and you have to have certain skills and the ability to hear information that is challenging to hear, that is difficult for them to tell you for a variety of reasons. When they have told what happened to them before, they have maybe had a very negative response from the person that was hearing it. And so over the years, I've learned and sort of honed the skill to be able to get that very difficult information from a victim, and be able to respond in a way that is receiving of the information without being judgmental, without pushing back, without having a response on my face of one that is horror. Because sometimes I hear really horrific things, and I know that's probably true for everybody on this panel who works in public safety or law enforcement. When somebody is telling you something that is a horrific event in their life, you have got to be able to receive that information in a calm, empathic kind of way. And so that's something that's very important. And then when you talk to them as well, and this is going on, one of the issues Sherri was talking about, people often say, do I need to hire a lawyer? I say, no. Me, the prosecutor, is here to represent the state of North Carolina, and I'm here to listen to you as a victim of a crime and present the best case we can to get you justice for your particular case. And so, no, you don't need to hire a lawyer. The state of North Carolina is going to represent your interest in court as well as the interest of the state of North Carolina. So that's one of those misconceptions that a lot of people have as well. So yeah, it's not something you come out of law school into necessarily knowing how to do, but it's something you better learn very, very quickly.
Thank you, Kaylee. And you're right about that, because I used to try to tell people that when they were involved as a victim of a crime, that the state of North Carolina had an interest in making sure that they were made whole again, or that the crime was prosecuted in such a way that hopefully it would never happen again to them or anybody in the state of North Carolina. It's almost like preventative law after the fact. So thank you for that. And I expect those of you women in law enforcement probably hear those stories almost immediately, because you're probably the ones who are interviewing the victims of crime for the very first time. Would that be correct in your capacities right now, Tammy or Tracy?
Well, being in the detention settings, we see people when they come in with the mental health, the addiction, their lowest point of their life, and we have to put our feelings aside and we have to help these people. And we have to keep them calm. We have to be, we're like a mother figure to them when they come in, because they want us to talk. I'll never forget, I went into work one morning and I was doing a round in the female block, and I heard this lady say, "Is that you, Miss Tammy?" And I said, "Yes." So she came and she met me, out in the day room, and she said, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I said, "No, ma'am, I don't." And she said, "You picked me up one day, and she said, you told me that I had something to live for." And she said that I will never forget how you respected me and you helped me and you talked to me and told me that I did have something to live for, that I had my kids. And she said, "I've straightened my life up." And I looked at her and she said, "I know you don't think so, because where I'm at right now, but," she said, "you have really helped me." And she said, "I'll never forget you."
Thank you. That kind of encouragement obviously means so much at a time of great distress. And we may never know how we have touched somebody's life, might we? That later they're able to see that we gave them hope. So there are probably people who have misconceptions about women who are in public safety roles in law enforcement and the judicial system. Other than just a general prejudice against women and women of color, as we've talked about already, what misconceptions do you think exist still in the realm of public safety that you can?
I guess that's really a hard question, because the culture right now is that, women can pretty much do anything they want. And that women, often, excel because, we're often wearing maybe 4 or 5 different hats at one time. So I think that sometimes they may be hesitant to actually do something else in fear that you're going to fail. But I think that, all the women on this panel, I've definitely seen them juggle probably 3 or 4 things and then add another into the mixture and excel at them all. So I think that sometimes, they look at women and maybe they think that, we're fragile, we can't, handle the pressure. But I've witnessed the pressure of pretty much everyone from the detention center to the judge, to the prosecutor, to, Tracy in her role. I've seen it all, and I've seen everybody excel. So it's really hard to, I guess, come up with a myth now, because we've pretty much kind of broken all the barriers, broken all of the ceilings. You have Tammy and Tracy both are like first of so many things. So it's amazing.
I know there are a lot of people who would say that women are too emotional to be able to handle some of the seriousness of these jobs that you panelists are handling.
So then when you're talking about emotions, then you look at Kaylee Tabor. I mean, she's probably got one of the hardest caseloads when it comes to children. And, she does it with a straight face and, still continues to seek justice. So, I mean, like I said, they can say that we're maybe too emotional or too sensitive, but then you have Kaylee who's going to defy the odds.
Sherri, thank you, Renita. Sherri?
Just in response to that first, I think that, when that sort of statement from, I know you're not making it, but from
No.
People, it presumes that having emotion is a bad thing and that men don't have it.
Yeah.
So I reject that notion and think that maybe, we can't just completely reason our way through everything and being aware of how we behave makes other people feel and how people feel and receive what we do. It makes a big difference in whether or not people have confidence in the public safety system, whether they have confidence in the judicial system. So having that sort of some sort of emotional intelligence, I think, is not a weakness, but a strength. The other thing that I was going to say in response to the question is that I think, and I think this happens a lot with people of color too, but there's some underlying sort of undercurrent that we somehow ended up where we are because we had an advantage, because they had to get more women or more people of color in a position. And I've had very progressive men say things to me that suggest things like as if that somebody who had the authority to appoint people to a position, being a woman, would be helpful to women because that person liked to appoint women, as if men have not had this advantage for hundreds of years. And, when I look and I think that it wasn't until the mid 70s, I think, that the University of North Carolina admitted women on an equal basis with men and didn't limit the number of women who could come in. Like, it's all I can do it's like so shocking to me that people still voice that, like, well, you'll have an advantage with that because you're a woman. And I think, well, if I'd been a voter in 1915, I couldn't have voted. What are you talking about? So I think that, that people will take that position in the immediate and not broaden out the perspective. And it's that's problematic. And I know that it happens with people of color, when the reality is that, I think that people have to be, are more scrutinized when they're people who are not in a traditional role than others.
Thank you, Sherri.
And I will tell you, it never felt like an advantage to me to be a woman in the legal profession when I started out. It did not feel like an advantage at all, especially when I was working in deeply rural counties like Johnston County and Harnett County. It was not fun, and it did not feel like an advantage. And so it really was a crucible that I had to get through in order to be where I am today, which is in a position of leadership in criminal justice, where I can help other folks understand that it takes so many different types of people with many different backgrounds to make up a great criminal justice system. Because without those diverse perspectives, all we have is our little tunnel vision of what our perspective is. We need all of these different perspectives in order to provide quality service to our communities. So yeah, I pushed back on the, oh, you have an advantage. It didn't feel that way to me at the time. And I think at this point, you know, talking about how, you know, our community is so much better than it used to be. I don't really think about that as much as I did, you know, maybe in the 80s.
Thank you, Kaylee. And I also think that we were extremely fortunate to be in this judicial district and in Chatham County in general. I lived down east for a number of years, and when I was first married, and it was a completely different atmosphere. And I know that we all acknowledge the role that Carl Foxx had with us, that Alan Badur had with us, and that I think that we were fortunate enough to have multiple perspectives and men who seemed to understand more about the advantages of women in the judicial system and in law enforcement. So I think that one of the things that I've been impressed by in reading your biographies is the idea of mentorship and teamwork. What does good teamwork look like you in your positions? And what do you do to foster that? Tracy and Tammy spoke a little of that in their law enforcement jobs. What does that kind of good teamwork look like across the board?
Well, I would say that I'm the managing ADA in Chatham County, which means I have to, you know, manage both staff and attorneys. And what I have learned over the many years that I've been doing that here is that everybody has a strength. You have got to stop focusing on what people are not good at. Focus on what they are good at, and play to those strengths. And put them in a position where they can excel. They will feel better, you will feel better, and the team will work better. And so that's something that I've learned over these many years in working in that kind of team environment. And it's critical that you can be a sounding board for your team, which means if they have an issue, whether it's work related or personal related, you've got to be there to be able to sit down and again, receive that information in a non-judgmental way and help them come up with solutions. If they're asking for solutions, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they just want to talk. Sometimes they just want to vent. And then you just need to don't offer solutions because that's just annoying. Just be there for them when they need to talk. So I think that's a good way to build a great team. Is always have your door open and be available to them and play to their strengths.
Very nice. Thank you, Kaylee. Tracy?
So the other thing about teams and teamwork is to make sure that everyone understands that you're not always going to agree with one another, and that it's not a personal attack on you when I say, Tammy, I don't agree with that. Or that we may have some disagreements, and they may get a little heated sometimes, but it's not personal. We're all on the same team working towards what we professionally want out of our agency, what we want from our office, how we want our people treated, how we want to be treated. So it's not personal, and we're not always going to agree on everything.
You know, there used to be an expression, Tracy, about women being their own worst enemy. And thank goodness we have bypassed that. But when I first became a lawyer, I think that, or even before then, when I was the legal secretary, I think that women thought that other women couldn't get along in an office, and that and that we were our own worst enemy. But I think we're past that now, and I think that that we're in a position to really savor the idea that our relationships together can be important and non-confrontational. You know, I mean, I think about the work that I've done in domestic violence through the years, and that has required me to work with each one of you, but particularly with Renita. I think that when we realize that we're all helping and that we're all part of that, whether it's Kaylee saying, you know, find the thing that you're the best at, that makes us work well together. And in particular, I guess the closest person I've had with respect to community involvement and safety is you, Renita, who looks to the safety of so many women in the county who we have seen in the court system. And hopefully we've made a difference in their lives, and hopefully we've gotten successful pathways for them for the future. So that's important. Yes, Sherri.
I think that, well, one thing that I like, and Tracy saying that made me think of it, is, well, first of all, I think that real growth and solutions come out of disagreement. If we all go into a meeting and we're all saying the same thing, then we don't learn or try anything new, number one. And number two, I think that we live in a culture that has very binary thinking. So that if Tracy's succeeding, then it means I am not, right? That I'm, you know, or if Kayley is doing well, then it means I am not. And instead of that either or thinking, I think we have to really turn to like both and. And I've heard this, I think it was a group of women in the Obama administration that did this that I heard about. I'm not actually sure if it's true or not, but if it's not true, they should have done it. Is they really, when, and in any administration or any workplace, when, if I'm the leader of a group and Tammy has a great idea or Renita has a great idea and I present it to the group, then I point to Tammy or Renita and say, this idea came from them. So we're constantly giving credit to each other instead of co-opting the ideas and keeping that sort of binary, I'm going to take this and I'm going to do better and you're not going to look as good. And I just think that kind of, it just leaves much more room when we have that sort of thinking to think, you know, if we're all, if Tracy is doing better, I am doing better. If Kaylee is doing better, I am doing better. When one person is doing better, it's good for all of us. And to remember that, and to not be afraid that somebody else's great idea is going to make me look bad or not as smart or not as whatever. So I think that's right. The rising tide lifts all the boats.
Yes.
And I frankly, I think that that's a way of thinking that women really bring more, you know, I feel like when we're frankly stuck in the other binary thinking is more, if we were going to gender it, probably more of a male trait than a female trait. And I'm probably going to get myself in trouble here. But, you know, I think that's more of what sort of the traditional way that people looked at it. Oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to say it and act like it was my idea, because if I give credit to this other person, I'm not going to look as smart.
Sherri, I'm so glad you brought that up, because, you know, it's very true. And, you know, especially in Chatham County, in a community that has so many different needs, one of the things that I constantly try to talk to my team about is that there's no such thing as I. It's always we. Because as long as you're talking about, or you're coming from a reference of we, then you're including your entire team. And when you're talking about the needs of the community, not one program, not one agency can provide or fulfill all the needs. So therefore, we have to learn to work together and use each other's strengths and potential for Janice in my office has this thing where she doesn't like saying weaknesses. I can't, she says like potential for strength. And like I said, once you meet her, it's like it changes how you talk about your children. So you can't say weakness, you have to say potential for strengths. And so once you looking at everybody's potential for strengths, you realize that, you know what, I can compliment her. She can compliment me. And the more that we work together and the more that we kind of fit together like a puzzle, the more stable we can become for our community and the more that we can address our community's needs. But if you are, just like you said, with the binary thinking that, you know, we can't move forward. You can't move forward thinking that you have all the solutions, you have all the answers. It doesn't work that way. And our community can't move forward if we have people that think that way. We have to be open to working together and, you know, sometimes stepping back, letting others step forward, and sometimes just joining arms together.
Very nicely put. Thank you. Let me ask a question to Tracy and Tammy, which I'm not sure. Do both of you work in the detention center, or are you in sort of the mothership? I'm not sure whether, you know, where you are in what it is you do.
So I am in the mothership, as you called it. It's the sheriff and then me. So I am responsible for a whole lot of people in many different divisions. Detention officers, as well as the Animal Resource Center and our sheriff's office. Tammy, our major, is over detention, training, and the Animal Resource Center.
Okay, great. So both of you are in situations where you're dealing with people, either staff people or incoming detainees who have visions of what you as a female bring to your jobs. Do you feel that that those are issues that have received enough talk today? Do you feel that those issues that you have with staff and that you have with the public are in good hands with the way you do your job today? That was not a particularly clear question, but you may see what I mean, is that if there are things that you can do as far as inspiring others, not necessarily just inspiring women, but inspiring others on your staff, at the detention area, where your kindness may very well be headed towards a detainee. Tammy?
Well, I always tell my staff, this is your book. You're writing it. Write your chapter. Write your ending. I'm going to be right there behind you, and I'm going to help you. And it's just like a detainee coming in. I have sit down before and talked to a detainee and just told them, cry. It's okay to cry. If I have to cry with you, I'll cry with you. You know, because I want them to know that I don't want them to see it as they see on TV, how the detention center has the bad rap, is, you know, we're going to come in and we're going to be mean to them. I want them to know that we are there to take care of them and that we want to get them help, and we want them to talk and communicate with us, and that we're going to respect them like they respect us.
It's not like on TV, is it?
No, it's not.
It's not in your job. It's not, certainly not in Sherri and Kaylee's job either. That's important to know. Those you don't know until you get into the judicial system that that it's really not at all like you might have thought or seen on TV. And then when you come in as a victim too, that's that's another step that you're not sure whether you have expectations. I've got to say that I have been the victim of a crime, and I ended up being somewhat disappointed at the outcome. But that was, that's part of growing up. Life doesn't always turn out the way you think it's going to, but you just hope for the best. What is the role of, several of you have backgrounds in addiction. Can you speak for a moment about what that causes in the community and how we can work together to solve the problems and the issues of addiction that that we see in our community?
This is Renita. I will say one of the things that I always tell people that when I encounter them, that I really do enjoy working in Chatham County. I do think that we have a very therapeutic justice system. And I do love how even from the bench down to the prosecutor, down to the detention center, I think that everyone is always trying to figure out how we can help. The moment they come into the jail, Tammy is thinking of, do they need detox? Do they need mental health treatment? When they come into the court system, Kaylee and others in the DA's office are thinking about, do they need to be in a separate track of court? Do they need to be in CRC? Do they need any type of residential treatment? What do they need? And then you have it at the bench also. The judges are looking at it from a different lens. They're looking at it as they want to heal their community. They're wanting to provide a leg up, not, be punitive. So when you're talking about addiction, I think that I can proudly say that everyone that I encounter understands that addiction doesn't judge. It will hit any socioeconomic status. It will hit any family. And therefore, I think that I am very proud of everyone that I work with, because they all come from a point of compassion. And they all come from a point of understanding. And they really do. And I think that if you're wanting to heal the community, I think that we have a great example of how we understand that, it's not about punishment. It's really about providing them opportunities or providing them with resources. If they take it, we can't take it personal. Hopefully they'll come around to it in their own time, but, we just have to make sure that we're constantly providing them with the resources to make that change whenever they decide to.
And I would say that, in the very beginning part of my life, I worked as a substance abuse counselor, but that's not really where I get my therapeutic push from, to be honest with you. It is through over 25 years of experience in the court system, watching how addiction kills people, harms people, in ways that are just heartbreaking. And the fact that, I've lost 2 members of my extended family to opioid addiction. They died of overdoses. It can happen to, like Renita said, anybody. I don't care who you are, how much money you have or how much money you don't have, how much education you have, whether you're a nurse, a doctor, a minister, or a lawyer, it can happen to you. And so it's sort of that life experience that has impressed upon me the need to be a therapeutic justice system. It's not enough to see a person at a point in time. And that point in time is that they're in the jail with Tammy. That's a terrible point in their life. That's a terrible point in time. But you have to have a holistic sort of program that looks at the whole person, not just them at that point in time. How did they get there? And where are they going from here? So law enforcement and the prosecutors are often very reactive, right? We're reacting to something that has just happened, but we don't have to just be reactive. We can be proactive, which is to get those folks early on in their addiction process and try to intervene, try to build resilience in that person so that they don't end up in a near overdose or an overdose. And one of the, I hope you guys read the Chatham News Record, I do. But one of the great things that they just publicize and through the county website is we're going to have an opioid, I'll call them a czar or czarina. It's going to be a person that is going to be managing the money from the opioid settlement to try to reduce overdose deaths in Chatham County. So this to me is incredibly exciting. Mayor Perry, Renita, anybody who needs any input or assistance from the prosecutor's office, let us know. We're very excited about getting that dashboard up and running so we can start targeting our resources to areas that need us most. And that's where people are not just dying, but nearly dying, because we know, and Renita knows a whole lot more about this than I do, but when someone dies of a drug overdose, they've probably nearly died dozens of times. So we've got to do better at finding those folks and intervening early. I know Renita and I shared, I call her a client. She was a defendant, but she's a client. We were trying to help her escape a domestic situation, escape her addiction, and she did. And she was like mentoring. And then one day Renita came in and said, she overdosed. And I was like, no, she didn't. We worked with her, a year, 2 years, and she was doing great. But that evil just caught her and grabbed her and drug her down after all that work. So you can never let up on the gas. You've got to keep working and working and working and helping them build resilience in their life. And I'm hoping this new program will help us do that for our county.
Well, and one of my next questions was, do we have enough resources when it comes to addiction? And Sherri's shaking her head, but how do you feel, Sherri?
Well, I mean, I think in a perfect world, and we're not living in a perfect world, but we would treat this much more as a public health crisis. I mean, we talk a lot now about destigmatizing addiction, and I think one way of doing that is, when we always talk of it within the confines of the criminal justice system, it's hard for it not to be stigmatized. So I think, it's probably a harder sell politically, but we would have a much more robust public health system for people who are not justice involved. I mean, that you didn't have to be justice involved to access. And I think it's important. I was at a conference for part of the day yesterday where I heard a woman who I'm guessing is probably in her 30s talking about her struggle with opioid addiction. She looked like a white middle class girl. She had, it was when her addiction started. And I could not retell you the number of times that she reported needing Narcan, that she reported going to detox and then leaving, that she went to residential treatment and left after 2 days, and how long this went on. And one of the fascinating things to me was she said, of course, her parents, the people around her trying to help her were doing the best they could, but they were offering solutions that basically had strings attached. That when she really started coming around was when there were peer support and EMS type people who are out in the community who, if she called, would show up with Narcan, would show up with clean, ask her any questions. would just keep showing up. When she said she was in trouble, they would show up, take her to detox. She might walk out of detox, but the next time she called, they'd show up again and take her to detox without saying things like, are you going to do it this time? Which really hit home with me, because I'm sure that I've said to dozens of people, are you really going to stick with it this time? I just think there's still a lot about the mental, just the deep shame that people are in this kind of addiction, that it's hard to understand. And a lot about what isolating people, how that kind of furthers addiction, the importance of community and having something else, having people available and people who will start out with just showing up. It was really interesting. And of course, a lot of it was also centered around destigmatizing this. And I know there has to be a criminal justice response, especially since a lot of crimes that aren't even, a lot of property crimes that aren't just strictly drug crimes come out of addiction. But I would like to see, I think it would be great if we could see a really robust public health response, and a really, a robust response that focuses first on maybe keeping people alive, and going from there.
Many, many years ago, when I first started, probably back in 2007, I met this young lady, and this was my first real eye opener. And I couldn't understand, she was 15 years old, and she's addicted to crack cocaine at 15. And, I would have her do these homework assignments, just telling me about, what was going on. It was at that point that I realized that everyone who's dealing with addiction is operating from a point of pain. And that if we really want to have effective change, I'm a big advocate for having more mental health inside the school. Our kids are struggling. And oftentimes when our kids are struggling, the first thing they do is they take something to numb the pain. But if we have more mental health workers inside the school that's responding to what's going on, I think that we could maybe potentially get ahead of the curve with addiction if we can start treating them on the more of the preventative side when they're in middle school, when they're, in high school, and even sometimes when they're starting to have these feelings in the 4th and 5th grade.
Yeah, I was just saying, we have got to educate Chatham County more. And we've got to get into schools like Renita said, and just coming together is the beginning, and us staying together is going to be the end of our story. And I want to get this message out on how we can help Chatham County and educate these people.
Thank you, Tammy. Kaylee?
Yeah, I was just reading the other day, there was a really interesting study that showed that for schools that had a higher number of medical and mental health personnel within the school, their kids did better. Not just medically and mental health wise, but learning wise. So, people are out there doing the work, trying to help us understand that this stuff works. If you do the research, it shows that it works. So for those who have the power of the purse, understand that if you improve mental health and medical care within the school, you're going to improve the learning of your students. You're going to have a better, I hate to call kids product, but your product coming out of school is going to be a product that's attractive to businesses. So, sometimes you have to convince people by dollars and cents and not just about doing the right thing. But it's the right thing, and it's going to have great outcomes if we focus more of our dollars towards not just addiction treatment, but getting that kind of help in the schools. So if you know people that have the power of the purse, I would strongly encourage them to do their own research, to look at the studies that show that this is a good thing for kids, it's a good thing for our community, and it's the right thing to do.
In addition to issues of mental health and addiction, I think we all recognize that suicide has become a major problem in the community as a whole. And I just think about the number of people that I know who have committed suicide. And I guess the extension of that is that it's is the hope that fails, the hope that you know, the offers of a concrete cure to addiction, and the fact that we're just not pulling together as much as we need to, that's caused an increase in suicide. Is that a fair statement to make?
I think that we just have to keep pushing the needle with prevention and education. You know, sometimes, you know, parents, you know, they're working a lot. So sometimes the only people that may be paying attention to the children are the staff inside of the school. So, you know, sometimes, you know, having that, you know, mental health professional that's, you know, solely dedicated to that one school, you know, means everything in the world. You know, we did last year, well, at the beginning of the year, we did a project with Chatham Charter, and, you know, the kids were talking about the semicolon, and, you know, and in mental health and with suicide, the semicolon is talking about a suicide that didn't happen. So the semicolon in mental health means, and my life goes on. So the kids were talking about, and they were doing art projects centered around the semicolon, because, you know, a lot of our children are experimenting with suicide. They have these thoughts. And so getting them to understand the power of that semicolon, that, you know, even when you have these bad thoughts, I want you to think about tomorrow's a new day, you know, how tomorrow can be better. And just getting them to understand the power and the education behind what that semicolon means within, you know, the mental health world.
Thank you, Renita. Are there any questions from our audience that we need to address before we go? It's almost 2:30, and was there anything on the chat that we needed to address?
There's one question in the chat, and you all have touched on it in various aspects. Are there any challenges or issues in your work that are specific to Chatham County? And I know the opioid crisis is one.
Sherri?
Transportation.
Yes.
I mean, we live in a geographically large county. Many parts of it are very rural. For example, North Chatham is very different from, as Kaylee says, Deep Chatham, but, you know, the western southern part of the county. And the demographic, you know, I would venture to guess that the average income is much different, and people in more rural parts of the county, I mean, we have no real public transportation system, and it is very hard for people, if even if we have resources, to get them to the resources that they need, to get them to court, to get them to jobs. So transportation, I think, is a huge sort of primary issue.
Absolutely.
One of the things, one of the inequities exposed by COVID has been the lack of infrastructure for internet access. And that is, it's not unique to Chatham, but Chatham's got it bad. And it affects folks' ability to access healthcare. They can't do telehealth. It affected their ability to attend school. These kids couldn't get the same advantages of doing remote learning that other kids were getting If they had access, it was not good access. And it has really prevented our justice system from embracing remote access to the courts because of the lack of uniformity in access to internet services. And so it is appalling in this day and age that we cannot treat internet access the same as we treat any other utility. Oh, sorry, Moose is in the background. He just woke up. Like we treat water or electricity or good sewer service. It is a utility, and people's lack of internet access is preventing them from excelling. It is keeping them from getting some of the advantages that other people have. It is targeting for suppression and oppression our poorer communities, our communities of color who traditionally had a lack of access anyway. And so to me, it's one of the biggest shames that this country has right now, is that COVID really exposed the haves and the have-nots, and it's unacceptable and it needs to change.
Thank you, Kaylee. As we wrap up here, then let us remember some of the gems that have come from our panel members today. The role that that self-care can bring for all of us, that you cannot pour from an empty cup, that we need to be flexible, absorbing the changes that our society has brought to us, both positive and negative. And that the binary view is just nothing that moves us forward. What moves us forward is stepping back and working together as a community. I'd like to think that Chatham County has done so much in those directions, but obviously we have great needs, the transportation and the internet access. Thank you all so much for participating in this panel and for reminding us about the great things that happen for public safety and the things that we need to put on the agenda to move forward. Thank you all.